Youngster Darren Stewart.
The nails in the relegation coffin were driven home on Sunday when Rosebud United was comprehensively beaten by Penrith City, bringing the wooden spoon to the hunter for the first time. Rosebud could have saved themselves from relegation if they'd won that match, but that wasn't the case, as Penrith scored 4 goals to 1.
Just 1.5 minutes later, the small but highly vocal Penrith crowd erupted again when Don Crowder...
Under the NSL rules, the only teams that can replace United are the top 2 from our State League competition. And following the weekend results, that means Belmont Swansea and Adamstown Rosebud. Those teams meet this weekend in a game that will decide the Premier, and also the club that will have right of way to claim the spot in the NSL. The Belmont club will discuss the opportunity at a directors' meeting on Saturday, and at this stage officials say they are interested. The Adamstown Rosebud Cooperative is also keen to consolidate their 2-year involvement in the NSL. It's ironic that the club that backed their NSL team to the hilt and offered their State League team next to nothing this year must now rely on their State League outfit to ensure the club's future in the NSL.
It was extremely satisfying. 2 years ago, Black...
Sir Marcus Loane is in Newcastle to deliver a Bible exposition over 3 evenings. Last night, more than 200 people attended at St John's, Cooks Hill. Since his retirement 3 years ago, Sir Marcus, an eminent Bible scholar, has travelled extensively lecturing and working for the Anglican Church. He recently returned from the East African countries of Kenya, the Sudan and Uganda, where a military coup replaced the Obote government. He says the church in Uganda is fulfilling an important role.
But yes, I think in a broad sense the Christian church has a very important role to play in all those countries, as it has had during the last 100 or 100 years and more. So much of what those countries enjoy today in the way of enlightened education, hospital facilities and so on, they owe to the work of missionaries, of churches founded originally by missionaries but now carried on by African clergy and African leaders.
Gail, who surprised more than just a few of the national show jumping fraternity by finishing well up at this year's Royal Easter, has continued her outstanding form. Arriving home at Morisset with her horse Midnight Star, Gail, competing in Brisbane over the past 2 weeks, took out her 3rd successive champion rider title. Midnight Star, the 3rd champion horse title. Several months ago, Gail received a broken forearm when kicked by a horse. I asked her if the arm, which was taken out of a brace for the Queensland event, affected her performance.
Well, I didn't have as much confidence as I normally have, and I was a lot weaker than usual, but it didn't affect my horse at all, so that was the main thing.
Yes, you're certainly achieving quite an outstanding record at the moment in show jumping, having come 2nd at the Royal Easter and now 3 times the Queensland Championship. How far, in fact, can Gail Powell go?
Well, hopefully if I can find a sponsorship next year, I'll be going to Perth and competing in the World Cup in Perth, and then hopefully overseas.
This has left the Newcastle City Administration in somewhat of a spot. It purchased the Tuggerah Lakes Military Museum collection for $500,000 last year, just a month after the City Council had been sacked. At that time, there was a mood of confusion and in some cases anger amongst residents. The administration says it was too valuable a collection to allow out of the region, but some saw it as a move to prove that the administration could still make important decisions for the city without aldermen. Since November, the collection has been in storage under tarpaulins gathering dust. The State Department of Tourism has imposed a 2-year time limit for the collection to be on display, but without the $400,000 in federal money, that target now seems unlikely. The Administrator, Colin Saunders, has refused to comment until he speaks to Town Clerk Barry Lewis, who will return from holidays on Monday. A spokesman says the administration will investigate all possibilities before it considers selling the collection. Meanwhile, there are other tourism projects in the Hunter that have done their sums and are being seriously considered for Steel City grants. The proposed Air Force Museum, which is temporarily being housed in sheds at Williamtown, is one. On Sunday, the RAAF will hold an open day to raise money for the museum. The government is considering granting $1 million for the building because it says the RAF will maintain the museum and it's confident there's enough public interest to ensure its viability. Other likely recipients are the Walker Waterworks, of which the state government is asking the federal government to match its $500,000 grant, and the Regional Museum and the Hands-on Science Museum Supernova, which will receive, if successful, $1.25 million for the restoration of the Castlemaine Brewery site in Hunter Street West. Other smaller projects such as tourism signposting and information centres are also being considered. According to the member for Newcastle, Alan Morris, a final decision on these Steel City assistance projects will be made in 8 weeks' time.
Fashion-conscious felines paraded before the judges at Merriweather High School. There were long-haired cats and short-haired cats, big and small cats, plain or multicoloured, foreign and native, brown, blue and green-eyed felines. Just about every cat for every category. For some beauties who decided to take a quick cat nap, the excitement proved too much, but all in all the day was a perfect success. Except for some whose curiosity equalled that of the spectators.
It is resolved that the appropriate representations be made for the reconsideration of a grant from the state in IAP or for the consideration of a grant from other sources towards the cost of the War Museum.
The announcement today by the City Administrator, Colin Saunders, was his first official comment on the mix-up. The administration bought the $500,000 collection last year in the belief the federal government would chip in $400,000 under the Steel Industry Assistance Program. But last week the administration was caught out when the federal government refused to help fund the collection. At today's announcement, a compile was released of all Council's correspondence relating to the acquisition. That compile included letters from State Tourism Minister Mike Cleary, the first advising Council to buy, and the second, after Council had done so, advising them that no funds would be provided by the federal government. Today, Colin Saunders rejected the suggestion that the acquisition was rushed into.
No, I think Council acted in good faith on the information that it had received, and it was convinced that this was the situation.
He also said he is hopeful funds will be received to pay for the collection, although he didn't say where he believed those funds would come from. Saunders hasn't backed away from the original decision to buy the collection and still believes it is important
is it that
to
the collection
region.
stays in the Hunter?
Well, I think from the tourism point of view it's quite important, and I think tourism is one of the few factors we have to boost the economies of the Newcastle area in view of the bad unemployment situation.
As a result of the mix-up, Council's financial commitment to buy the Wood Street Brewery site will also come under review. Meanwhile, the Administrator also had good news today when he gave the final go-ahead to a central part of the Shortland Wetlands project. He announced that the option on Marist Park would be taken up and the site would be purchased for $404,000. He said Council would put up $100,000 to support the project, $50,000 would go towards its purchase, and another $50,000 would be spent on the development of the complex. Hunter Wetlands Trust Treasurer John Tate says his group is very excited about the decision.
It's the final point for the go-ahead. The BHP announcement is the thing that really made it all happen, but today's decision is the final decision which will make it go ahead. We're very pleased about it.
He says the project should be open to the public by Christmas. The 25-metre twin-hull ferry Fishburn is the first of an $8.3 million contract for 4 vessels for Sydney's inner harbour passenger runs. Named after a boat in the First Fleet, it will join 5 other twin-hulled ferries already built for the Urban Transit Authority by the Slipways under a separate contract. The new ferries have been upgraded to seat 400 instead of 250 people. The most noticeable change, however, is the new green and gold colour scheme. These ferries are being funded under the Bicentennial Road Grants scheme and consequently bear the bicentennial colours instead of the UTA's traditional blue and white. After the blessing of the ship, the wife of the local government minister, Mrs Jean Stewart, performed the honours. The Fishburn starts work on Sydney Harbour in a month, and if all goes to plan, the second should be joining it by December. Meanwhile, 2 of the largest ships in the Newcastle coal trade are currently berthed end-to-end at Port Waratah Coal Services. The Korean sister ships Hyundai Pacific and Hyundai Oceanic both weigh 135,000 tonnes. The Oceanic will load 125,000 tonnes of coking coal, while the Pacific will load just under 120,000 tonnes of steaming coal. Both cargoes are for Korea, and the ships will leave this evening.
For these 27 children, this week at the Tocal Agricultural College is one that's packed with fun and games. All of the terminally ill children are out to prove that they can have just as much fun together away from their homes and families. According to organisers, the camp gives the children a week of fun and fellowship. It's a breakaway from the hospitalisation and sometimes severe treatment that the cancer-related diseases require. Each of the 35 volunteers are assigned to a camper. And as 8-year-old Sandra Bass explains, there's so much happening that she hardly thinks that you're doing over the week.
We're going canoeing, horse riding, and we're doing archery. And we're going to make kites this afternoon.
And what's some of the best things about the camp that you like?
Well, being with my friends and meeting new friends.
And what would be the best part that you like? Is it getting away from Mum and Dad for a week?
Yeah.
Most of us are used to seeing the older generations gracing the bowling greens, but lawn bowls is becoming increasingly popular amongst youth. At the Lambton Bowling Club today, 32 competitors aged between 13 and 18 were representing their high schools in the Hunter section of the New South Wales Junior Pairs Championships. Amongst them was Paul Wesh from Swansea, who is the state school singles champion. The tournament was to be a 2-day affair, but Monday's rain meant all 3 rounds had to be played today. While that kept competitors very busy, Lambton Bowling Club officials were busy keeping an eye on them with a video camera. They taped 3 ends by each competitor, and the footage will be played back to the youngsters, allowing them to see and correct any faults in their technique. Today's winners will play the zone semi-finals in Sydney on Friday. The state final will be decided at the Lambton Club later this month.
Ken Willing says he and his associates won the fight in the Environment Court when the council withdrew its development application for the commercial centre. During those hearings, he gathered documents, which he says raises some interesting questions about the council's business practices.
To start with, you've got a situation here where the minister's never approved council's application for a $12.3 million overdraft on the estate here. And yet, without that approval, you've got Mr Walsh, the Shire Clerk, approving a contract to clear and fill this commercial site here of $270,000, which has now been done. That's blown out to $450,000, plus some roadworks for the commercial, which has taken it to $640,000 has been spent on that now. Now, you've got a situation where the investigators said not to proceed in May this year and to do no further works. You've got Mr Walsh recommending in one document there that $400,000 commission be paid to Centennial for introducing the buyer. Well, of course, we all know now that the buyer was merely a letter of interest from someone, and yet it's been discussed that they pay $400,000 commission, which would take the commercial content expenditure here to over $1 million, and of course it doesn't look like going ahead now. You've got the Keats report saying that the centre was too big, saying that the rents were about double what they should be and not achievable. And you've got him finally saying that the commercial centre should be approved to support the residential centre.
The mural graces the Dairy Farmers' Corner in Hunter Street West, and its unveiling this afternoon was a cause for celebration for the more than 20 unemployed volunteers who worked on it. The team was led by well-known local mural artist Birgitta Hansen. She told the audience that the project took 3 months, and the artist worked throughout last night, completing final details and repairing damage caused by vandals. The artwork has now been specially coated, which should mean any graffiti can be washed off. The mural is a community arts centre project for International Youth Year, and Birgitta Hansen received a $6,500 grant from the Australia Council to work on it full-time. The chairman of the Australia Council, Donald Horne, praised the efforts of the CAC and the Newcastle community in general. He said, however, that the city needs a community gallery and a new home for the CAC, and called on the City Council to provide a suitable building. On a happy note, the mural project has led 3 of the volunteers to form a mural cooperative, and they have already gained 79 offers of work.
A fleet of 13 Australian 505s will compete in the International World Championships at Enoshima Olympic Yacht Harbour next month. Of the fleet, 10 boats hail from the Royal Motor Yacht Club at Toronto, including current world champion Dean Blatchford and the winner in 1983, Terry Kerwood. Today, the crews, sponsors and friends attended the official farewell for the sailors at the City Hall. The fleet is the largest Australian contingent to compete in a world title, and the team goes into the championships as favourites, with a swag of world, Pacific and Australian titles to their credit. Strong opposition is expected to come from boats from the United States and Europe. The boats left Australia recently and are currently en route to Japan. The team itself will leave on the 9th of October, and the championships swing into action on October the 11th.
More than 1,000 people have perished in air disasters like Manchester and Japan in the last 4 months, making 1985 the worst year in aviation history. At Scone Airport today, emergency services personnel participated in a simulated air crash. The operation is designed by the State Health Department and the Hunter Regional Disaster Planning Committee to assess the response of various emergency services to casualties and fire hazards in an incident such as this. An aircraft is forced to make an emergency landing at Scone Airport. A fire breaks out and there are 26 passengers and crew on board.
The airport
officer here, local, he rings the 000 number, and that call goes through to Newcastle Police Radio, whoever he asks for first, and then they contact the remaining emergency services, who get their representatives here to the crash scene.
There are many people injured. Burns, broken bones, lacerations and cases of shock. Fire units are first on the scene. Next, the paramedics arrive and begin sorting out the most urgent cases from the victims who can wait. The entire operation is coordinated by police from a central command post. Peter Anforth, Regional Coordinator for Disaster and Rescue, has recently returned from the United States, where he observed American rescue techniques. He believes it's healthier to be rescued by Australians.
And I would say that our resources and our organisation, our control, command and situation is equal to anything in the world.
Despite the realistic makeup and the smoke and the fire, this is, after all, only a drill. Every disaster is different and procedures vary enormously. Nevertheless, the experiences of today will certainly help these servicemen and volunteers to cope with an air disaster if called upon to do so.